woman sits alone in her car, the world outside muffled and irrelevant. A song begins, just a few piano notes, soft and slow. She's heard it before, maybe, or maybe not. It doesn't matter. Within seconds, something inside her begins to shift. Her chest tightens, her breath catches. Tears rise, not with violence, but with quiet inevitability. She doesn't know why. There's no story flashing through her mind, no memory anchoring the emotion. She's just crying. For a moment, she isn't thinking at all. She's feeling fully, inexplicably, deeply. And all of it was triggered not by words, not by an image or idea, but by sound. Invisible, mathematical, vibrational sound. Why can a melody make us cry? Why does music so abstract, so ephemeral, possess the power to undo us? Unlike film or poetry, music doesn't require context. It doesn't need language. It doesn't need a beginning or end. It can enter the body like breath, bypassing cognition entirely. And yet it can produce some of the most profound emotional reactions humans are capable of. Crying to music is not rare. It's common, universal. People across cultures and generations report being brought to tears by songs they don't fully understand, songs with no personal associations, no specific meanings. This raises a stunning contradiction. If tears usually signal grief, joy, or personal loss, what is the brain registering when it responds emotionally to mere sound? Music, biologically speaking, is just air molecules vibrating at certain frequencies. Yet those vibrations, when arranged in specific patterns, can elicit complex feelings: nostalgia, elation, sorrow, transcendence. Neuroscience offers a clue. When people listen to emotionally powerful music, brain scans show activation in nearly every major neural region, especially those involved in emotion, the amygdala, memory, the hippocampus, reward, the nucleus accumbens, and even motor planning, the cerebellum. In some individuals, music causes dopamine, release, the same neurotransmitter associated with food, sex, and social connection. In others, certain musical phrases trigger a phenomenon known as frisson, chills, goosebumps, even tears. But music's ability to make us cry isn't just about chemical pleasure or physical reaction. It's about something deeper, more mysterious. In fMRI studies, the same musical passages that bring listeners to tears also activate brain regions associated with loss, love, and awe. These are not casual emotions, they are existential. Music, somehow, touches the same circuits we use to process life's most profound moments. It speaks to the body before the brain can catch up. It creates meaning out of feeling, even when no meaning is consciously understood. And perhaps the most puzzling part is this: music doesn't have to be about anything in order to mean everything. It can carry no lyrics, no story, no known history, and still, it can break us open. So the question becomes, what are we really crying for when we cry to music? Are we mourning something unnameable inside ourselves? Are we remembering what was never consciously forgotten? Or are we simply being reminded, however briefly, that we are alive, feeling, and profoundly connected to something larger than language? Whatever the answer, one thing is clear: music is not just entertainment. It is not background noise. It is a force, a language older than words, deeper than thought, and more precise in its emotional impact than almost anything else in human experience. And when it makes us cry, perhaps it's not sadness we're feeling, but recognition. A brief, breathtaking moment of emotional truth, spoken in notes we didn't know we already understood. Before there were cities, before there was writing, before a single story was carved into stone, there was music. Archaeologists have uncovered bone flutes from over 40,000 years ago, hollowed out bird bones with carefully placed holes, tuned to create deliberate pitches. These ancient instruments are not symbols of leisure. They are artifacts of something. essential, an urge not just to survive, but to express, to feel, to connect. Music, it seems, did not evolve as a luxury. It evolved as a necessity. Long before structured language, music gave humans a way to vocalize emotion, longing, fear, joy, safety through tone, rhythm, and resonance. It gave shape to the unseen. Charles Darwin, ever curious about how emotion might be embedded in biology, speculated that music evolved from mating calls and primitive vocalizations. He imagined our ancestors humming to attract partners or soothe infants long before they could form words. Others believe music's roots lie in something broader, the need to bond. Coordinated rhythms helped early humans synchronize movement, whether hunting, dancing, or marching. Shared melodies may have signaled trust, strengthened cohesion, and allowed groups to operate as emotional units rather than just collections of individuals. In this light, music wasn't decoration, it was survival, and yet today, music is everywhere, blasting from speakers, seeping through headphones, echoing in elevators, filling the silence of hospitals and churches. Over 700 million people use music streaming platforms, often daily. But why? It's not just for background noise. We turn to music not to escape feeling, but to find it. People listen to sad songs when they're grieving, fast beats when they're preparing for battle, whether that battle is an exam, a breakup, or an actual war. Newborns are welcomed with lullabies. Couples seal their vows with songs. We bury our dead to the sound of violins and choirs. Music scores the most intimate and public rituals of human life. It doesn't narrate emotion, it amplifies it. Neuroscience now confirms what ancient rituals already knew. Music reliably triggers deep emotional responses. It recruits multiple systems: auditory, motor, emotional, cognitive, creating a full body, full brain experience. This complexity is why a melody can make us cry, dance, or feel inexplicably seen. But this raises an urgent question. If music is capable of generating such powerful emotional states, are we using it only as entertainment? Or is it something more? A tool for catharsis, a way to process unspoken pain, regulate stress, or access joy that words can't reach? Modern therapists increasingly think so. Music is now used in clinical settings to support trauma recovery, neurorehabilitation, and even immune function. People with Alzheimer's often recall old lyrics when they can't remember names. Stroke patients regain speech through melodic intonation therapy. Children with autism improve social awareness through rhythm. Music doesn't just move us metaphorically, it moves neural pathways into new alignment. So what's really at stake is this: music isn't frivolous, it's fundamental. It is not something humans invented, it's something we uncovered, something that was already wired into our biology, waiting to be played. And in a time when many feel disconnected from their bodies, their emotions, and each other, music may not only be a bomb, it may be one of the last remaining languages that still knows how to speak to the soul directly. The question is not whether music makes us feel, but whether we're listening deeply enough to let it heal. In 2011, a team of researchers at the University of North Carolina made a fascinating discovery. People who cried while listening to music didn't show signs of distress, as one might expect. Instead, their bodies showed increased activity in the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch responsible for rest, digestion, and emotional regulation. This wasn't the chaos of a panic attack or the rupture of grief. It was something else entirely, a state of calm, of release. These musical tears were not a sign of falling apart, but of coming home to oneself. The paradox was immediate and profound. How could crying, typically associated with emotional overload or pain, be accompanied by a state of physiological peace? This led neuroscientists deeper into the strange terrain of music's effect on the brain. What they found was a complex interplay of activation across systems, typically seen as oppositional. Music that brought people to tears often triggered the nucleus accumbens, the brain's primary reward center, associated with dopamine release. This is the same region that lights up for sex, food, and addictive substances. But at the same time, music also activated areas involved in fear, social pain, and bodily awareness: the amygdala, the anterior cingulate cortex, and the insula. In other words, the brain was registering both pleasure and vulnerability, reward and exposure, all at once. This dual activation creates what psychologists now call a bittersweet emotional state, a condition that's not split between happiness and sadness, but composed of both simultaneously, and it may be unique to music. Unlike language, which tends to categorize, or visual art, which is spatially fixed, music unfolds through time. Its phrasing, harmony, and tone modulate experience moment by moment, allowing the listener to feel contradictory emotions in a single breath. A rising chord progression might stir hope, while a minor interval simultaneously evokes melancholy. The result is not confusion, but catharsis, stares, not as breakdown, but as a neurological resolution. But the puzzle runs deeper. Why would something as abstract as a song, a series of pitch and rhythm patterns, generate such full-bodied emotional responses? It's not just memory or association. People cry to unfamiliar music too. Some of the most powerful reactions come when the music has no context, no known narrative, no past attachment. The tears arrive uninvited, unaccounted for. That suggests something fundamental is happening, something below language, beyond culture. One theory holds that music mimics the prosody of human emotion, the rising and falling contours of speech, the rhythm of a heartbeat, the tonal shifts of a lullaby or a lover's voice. The brain, finely tuned to detect emotional nuance in sound, may interpret certain musical passages as deeply personal even when they aren't. This interpretation isn't rational, it's felt, it's somatic, and it blurs the line between inner and outer worlds. Music, in this frame, becomes not a communication between artist and audience, but a dialogue between the nervous system and itself. So the dilemma deepens. Music triggers the biological mechanics of sadness, their stillness, openness, but delivers them without the threat, loss, or trauma that usually causes them. It offers sorrow in a safe container, and in doing so, it may allow the body to rehearse emotional regulation, to process grief in microdoses, to reconnect with vulnerability without being overwhelmed by it. This is the emotional paradox at the heart of the musical tear. We weep not because we are in pain, but because we are safe enough to feel what we normally suppress, and that is what makes it beautiful. Not tragic, transformative. The more we study music, the stranger and more profound the mystery becomes. Why does the brain treat organized sound as if it were raw emotion? One reason lies in the mechanics of sound itself. Music mimics the acoustic contours of human emotion, rises and falls in pitch, the rhythmic pacing of urgency, the tonal instability of grief, the soft resolution of comfort. The brain, wired to read emotional prosody in speech, treats musical phrasing in much the same way. A minor chord can sound like a sigh. A crescendo can mimic the swell of a cry. These aren't just metaphors. They're neurological truths. Studies using fMRI and EEG show that emotional music activates the same regions, responsible for detecting tone and emotional inflection in human voices even when no words are spoken. This connection isn't new. Thousands of years ago, ancient Greek philosophers debated whether music had the power to infect the soul, to bypass reason and speak directly to the passions. Aristotle warned of music's power to stir the irrational part of the psyche. In the Middle Ages, Gregorian chants were composed with the specific intent of inducing transcendence and surrender. And in modern history, Governments have gone so far as to ban certain songs during wartime because of their content, but because of their emotional power. A melody, they feared, could break morale. A lament could disrupt order. Music has always been more than sound. It has always been emotional force. But here's where modern science diverges. Some neuroscientists argue that music is biologically incidental, a kind of auditory cheesecake, in Steven Pinker's famous phrase. According to this view, music is a byproduct of other evolved systems, like language and motor coordination, a pleasurable but ultimately useless indulgence. Others vehemently disagree, pointing to studies showing music's role in emotional bonding, co-regulation, and healing. Music helps infants recognize emotional tone long before they understand words. It helps couples synchronize heart rates. It helps strangers weep together in the dark. This raises a cultural question as old as music itself. Do we shape our music, or does music shape our emotions? In Japan, enka ballads carry melancholy as a form of beauty, an aesthetic called aware, the bittersweet awareness of impermanence. In Western cultures, sad music often resolves with hope, echoing narrative arcs of redemption. In other parts of the world, music doesn't follow tonal resolution at all, but relies on repetition, trance, or dissonance to evoke complex states. And yet, across cultures, people cry to music. The instruments may differ, the scales may diverge, but the human response remains: tears, chills, silence, something shared across time and geography, rooted deep in the biology of emotion. Yet there's a paradox here too. Music gives us access to grief, longing, and vulnerability in ways that are emotionally safe. It allows us to feel without the actual threat. But for some, this safety becomes a sanctuary they never want to leave. People can become emotionally addicted to melancholy music, not just enjoying it, but relying on it as their primary emotional outlet. Repeated exposure to sorrowful music can deepen rumination, reinforcing feelings of sadness instead of releasing them. The line between healing and looping becomes blurred. What begins as catharsis can, in some cases, become stagnation. Worse still, for those with trauma histories, music can sometimes unlock memories the brain has worked hard to suppress. A certain chord progression or instrumental timbre can trigger flashbacks or emotional flooding, especially when the listener doesn't understand the origin of the reaction. In therapeutic settings, music must be used with care. It is not always benign. It is powerful, yes, but power requires discernment, so we are left with a deeply human tension. Music is our emotional mirror. It helps us feel what we cannot say. It offers safe simulations of heartbreak, longing, and joy in a world that often suppresses all three. But it can also trap us. It can hold us in emotional states we mistake for truth. The same melody that sets us free can also tether us to memory, to pain, to loops we don't know we're reliving. And this complexity, this ambiguity, may be why we return to music again and again, not just to feel, but to better understand the feelings we already carry. The deeper scientists looked into the phenomenon of tears triggered by music. The stranger the story became, because those tears, those soft, sudden, inexplicable reactions, weren't simply markers of sadness or nostalgia. In fact, some of the most common emotional responses to music came not from sorrow, but from something more elusive, awe. Researchers began calling it aesthetic chills, a term for the goosebumps, shivers, lump-in-throat moments people experience when music hits a certain emotional frequency. These chills, they discovered, weren't emotional flukes. They were neurological signatures of something profound happening in the brain. In those moments of chills or tears, brain scans revealed a remarkable pattern. Multiple systems, auditory, emotional, and somatosensory, began firing in synchronized harmony. The nucleus accumbens released dopamine, The insula, which tracks internal states, lit up. The amygdala, the seat of emotional intensity, pulsed with activity. But most curiously, the default mode network, the part of the brain associated with self-referential thought, identity, and time, went quiet. This network is usually buzzing with narratives. Who am I? What do I need to do? What do I regret? But during aesthetic chills, it drops away. In that stillness, people report something ineffable: timelessness, unity, emotional transcendence. It's a moment where the self dissolves, not in confusion, but in clarity. People describe it like standing before something impossibly beautiful. The ocean at dusk, the face of a sleeping child, a piece of music that makes them feel simultaneously alone and infinitely connected. And this was the twist. The tears weren't about sadness. They were about scale, about the feeling of touching something larger than oneself, something the rational mind can't explain. But the body knows how to feel. This realization changed everything. It reframed the way we understand musical tears, not as a collapse, but as a breakthrough, not as grief, but as awe. And awe, from a psychological standpoint, is one of the rare states that reduces self-focus and increases feelings of connection, generosity, and humility. In that brief window, people often feel more human, more porous, more alive. That explains why a single chord progression can evoke the feeling of loss, not because you're remembering something specific, but because, in that moment, you realize how much beauty exists just beyond your ability to hold it. So the deeper truth began to emerge. We don't cry to music because it's sad. We cry because we are overwhelmed by meaning, or by the absence of it. The song bypasses language and enters the architecture of the self, asking a question with no clear answer. Asterisk, what does it mean to feel this much? And in response, the body offers the only answer it has: a shiver, a tremble, a tear. To cry. To cry to music, then, is not to be weak. It is to be awake, to be tuned in, however briefly, to the mystery of what it means to be a feeling creature in a world that often forgets how to feel. It is not a flaw of biology. It is a feature, one that speaks to the depth of human perception and the possibility that even in silence, even in sound, we are never truly alone. Today, science paints a clearer and far more beautiful picture of why we cry to music. At its core, music engages the very systems that regulate emotion, identity, memory, and even social bonding. When we listen to a powerful piece of music, our brain doesn't just hear it, it feels it. Emotional music lights up the limbic system, particularly the amygdala and hippocampus, both critical for processing, feeling, and storing memory. But more than that, music activates the brain's default mode network, the system involved in introspection, meaning-making, and the construction of a narrative self. This explains why some songs feel autobiographical, even if they aren't about us. They become mirrors, reflecting not specific memories, but emotional truths we may not yet have put into words. What's even more remarkable is that these responses aren't dangerous or disorganizing. Quite the opposite. Crying to music is often a form of emotional recalibration. It gives the brain a way to simulate overwhelming experiences without consequence. It's a kind of safe rehearsal, a neurological sandbox where grief, joy, and awe can be explored without destabilizing the self. Studies show that these musical tears often accompany parasympathetic activation, meaning the body is entering a state of calm regulation, not distress. It's not the pain that's leaking out, it's the release. Therapists and neuroscientists are now applying these insights in powerful ways. Music therapy has become a mainstream tool in treating trauma, neurodegeneration, depression, and anxiety. For patients with Alzheimer's disease, music from their youth can awaken memories and language when nothing else does. In veterans with PTSD, rhythmic drumming and tonal improvisation can help regulate the nervous system and reintroduce emotional flexibility. In hospice care, music can ease pain, reduce agitation, and allow patients to reconnect with loved ones, even when speech is no longer possible. Music becomes not just a comfort, but a kind of neurological bridge. From a practical perspective, the music that moves us most isn't arbitrary. It reflects something deeply personal, our emotional wiring, our early sensory experiences, the cultural cadences we grew up with. Some people cry to the lullabies they heard in childhood, others to film scores that accompanied moments of transformation or loss. Some are moved by minimalist piano, others by gospel choirs or traditional folk. The diversity doesn't dilute the power, it reinforces it. These musical tears are data. They reveal what matters most to your nervous system, what kind of beauty, tension, or longing your brain is uniquely attuned to. And in that sense, music becomes more than an emotional experience. It becomes a diagnostic tool, a way to access the hidden architecture of the self. In a world that often demands we explain our feelings, music offers another path, one where no words are needed, one where your tears do the talking, one where you get to feel safely, deeply, and fully what it means to be alive. In a quiet room, an elderly man sits in a wheelchair, eyes distant, mind clouded by dementia. He hasn't spoken in days. The nurses move gently around him, careful, kind, but he doesn't respond. Then, someone presses play on a small speaker beside him. A melody recessive, old, familiar. It's the song he used to dance to with his late wife. His face doesn't change at first, but then his eyelids flutter. A tear slips down his cheek, and slowly, like a dawn breaking over forgotten fields, he smiles. He doesn't say her name, he may not even remember her face, but in that moment he remembers love, not as a thought, but as a feeling that outlives memory, a rhythm once shared, a body once held, a song once danced to in kitchens and living rooms, now echoing across time, because music is not just sound, it's not just entertainment, it is memory encoded in vibration, emotion stored in resonance, identity hidden in rhythm. When we listen to music, we don't hear it with our ears alone. We hear it with our entire nervous system, with the parts of us shaped by love, loss, joy, longing, and all the things we've lived through but never found words for. Music enters through the body, bypasses the intellect, and speaks directly to the parts of us we didn't know were still listening. It doesn't explain, it remembers, it reminds. Maybe that's why we cry, not because we're sad, but because we've touched something honest. Maybe those tears are not a sign of breaking, but of alignment, a moment when the body, the brain, and the soul agree. This mattered, this still matters. A song becomes a reunion, a melody becomes a mirror, and suddenly we're not just hearing music, we're hearing ourselves, reflected back in the universal language of sound. So what if music isn't here to decorate our lives, but to help us survive them? What if it's not just art, but medicine, not a distraction, but a guide? What if every time the body trembles to a chord, or tears well up at a harmony, it's not weakness, but wisdom? Because in those moments, when music makes us cry, something beautiful happens. The boundaries between past and present dissolve. The false walls between self and other soften. And what's left is something utterly human. The fragile, resilient ability to feel deeply, to remember love, to grieve beauty, to be alive. Maybe that's why music was born before language. Maybe that's why it still touches what nothing else can. And maybe, when we cry to music, we are not falling apart. We are coming back together, one note at a time.